The Iranian government has created for itself several enemies over the past 40 years. From Gulf nations to Western Europe to North America to Israel, and even sanctions from the UN. To counter this, Iran has gone to seek more allies, which in return has increased hostility from its enemies. How has Iran gone to gain this many opponents, and why do many analysts believe that this could lead to a war? This all starts on 1953. Iran had a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh. He, along with the parliament, decided to nationalize the country's oil, which British government owned 51% share. Angered by the decision of the Iranian government and fearing Iran getting closer to the Soviet Union, the British M16 and the American CIA began to orchestrate a coup to install a dictator, the Shah, who was then just a figurehead, as the new head of state. For the next 2 decades, the hatred that the people of Iran had for the Shah grew even larger. He gave majority of the country's oil wealth over to the UK, and he started to westernize and secularize the country. Iranians who take pride in their Persian culture and Shia religion began seeing the Shah as a man who was threatening their culture. There was also a great lack of employment in the country. While the elite and the rich lived off luxury, majority of Iranians were living in poverty and couldn't find jobs. Universities were producing more graduate than there was jobs. Angered by this, Iranians began revolting against the Shah. Initially, it wasn't an Islamic revolution. It was a revolution similar to the French Revolution, to overthrow the Shah and his family, who lived a life of luxury in the midst of widespread unemployment and poverty. On top of that, the public saw him as a U.S. puppet. Fearing the revolution, the Shah left the country, which in effect ended the monarchy. It was this time that a Shia clergy named Khomeini, who was exiled to Paris, returned to the country. He, along with other clergy, began to form a new system in which Iran will be run by the Shia clergy. Iranians in waves started to support this idea, seeing it as a revival of their country and culture, which then turned the revolution into an Islamic revolution. And on 1st of April, 1979, Iran voted by national referendum to become an Islamic republic. It's important to remember that even though the king did leave the country, he had many supporters. However, when the Islamic Republic was established, many began to leave the country too, leaving Iran to be predominantly Khomeini supporters. Many Iranians wanted the Shah to return to Iran to face trial. The United States refused to hand him over. In return, a group of armed students attacked the U.S. Embassy and captured 66 American citizens and held them hostage, which came to be known as the Iranian hostage crisis. It was this moment that the United States imposed its first ever sanction on Iran, and the U.S.-Iran relationship became hostile and would never recover. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Iran was gaining more enemies. As the Iranian Revolution was happening, Saddam Hussein of Iraq decided that this was a good moment to attack Iran and gain control. This was a dangerous moment for Iran, as Iraq was being supported by Saudi Arabia, Gulf countries, United States, and even the Soviet. Meanwhile, Iran just came out of a devastating revolution. However, Iran somehow managed to hold Saddam's army back. The main allies Iran had in the war was Libya and Syria, one of which would prove to be key ally for Iran. During the war, Israel was also funding Iran, so as to balance the power Iraq had. However, with Iran leaders regularly showing anti-Israel sentiment, Israel and Iran would become harsh enemies. In 2003, with the Iraq invasion, Iran no longer had a balancing power in the Middle East, forcing the United States to stay in Iraq, even though their objective of Iraq was complete nearly 17 years ago. In the next few years, Iran decided to increase its nuclear program, causing Western and Middle East countries to sanction the country. Realizing that the sanctions may not stop Iran's nuclear goal, a deal was signed by Iran and the 5 Security Council members that removed the sanctions on Iran, and in return, Iran would stop the nuclear program. Pressure from Israeli lobby, the United States in years' time would walk away from the deal. However, Iran's greatest influence in the region really came to light after 2011. In the year of 2010, a man in Tunisia burns himself in protest of police corruption and ill treatment. which caused outrage in the country, causing mass protest and violence between the people and the government. Soon this anti-government resentment spread across the Arab world, some of which, like Syria and Yemen, would turn deadly. Syria is run by Shia government, while the majority are Sunni. While in Yemen, their Sunni government collapsed due to revolt by Shia Zaydi sect and now seeks to control Yemen. Both countries have two key players behind the scene, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And these two nations' string spreads to nearly all Middle East countries. An example is in Bahrain, where Iran encouraged the Shia majority country to rise up to the Sunni monarchy. In return, Saudi Arabia sends grown troops to support the monarchy. This rivalry is also in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Wherever there is Sunni and Shia divide, these two nations can be found, causing Saudi Arabia to be Iran's greatest rival. With these growing foes, Iran started seeking friends from abroad. With China, it signed a 25-year-long $400 deal. In Russia, it's signed an oil corporation deal worth $20 billion and signed deals even as far as Venezuela and Zimbabwe. These deals have helped Iran to stay a regional power. As Iran's oppositions grow further and its sanctions increase, Iran increases its support for its allies in order to even the battlefield. Hitler came to power due to harsh treatment in Germany following World War I, and Kim dynasty became a nuclear-powered due to heavy sanctions from the outside world, causing many to believe that if this anti-Iranian sentiment doesn't stop, it could escalate to a war. You probably have noticed that there wasn't any advertising from YouTube. I won't ever monetize this channel as I don't support certain ads YouTube shows. In the future, we will find our own partner. If you liked this video and want us to cover certain topics in an unbiased way, I set up a Patreon account where you can support me and this channel. I have cool stuff there. I will be posting a vote for the next video's topic. I'll also be starting a live Q&A sessions weekly. Probably when the channel gets bigger, I'll make it monthly. But in the meantime, link is in the description. Go over there and support.